This city was later named by the Turks as Istanbul and became their capital. In 1481, their empire stretched from the river Danube to southern Anatolia. In the 1500s, they reached their height during the reign of Sultan Bayezid II from 1481 to 1512. The empire became a naval leader in the Mediterranean region. They conquered Syria in 1516 and Egypt in 1517. Suleiman I, known as Magnificent throughout Europe, became their supreme ruler from 1520 to 1566. His army conquered much of Hungary during 1526 in the Battle of Mohacs, and he expanded his empire to Yemen in the south, Morocco in the west, and Persia in the east. The Ottomans were extremely cruel to everybody they considered as their opponents and used fear tactics under the influence of the most fanatical viewpoints and superstitions. They demanded submission under the sword and engaged in bloodbaths everywhere they went, having no respect for human dignity, just the same as a few other nations. Many European innocents have been slaughtered by them. It is no wonder that Europeans were wary of their expansion. However, European forces succeeded in defending the city of Vienna during a Turkish attack in 1529, and their fleets defeated the Turkish navy in the Battle of Lepanto near Greece in 1571. In 1683, the Turks again tried to capture Vienna, but failed. During the 1700s, the Ottomans became weaker and lost a 6-year battle against Russia. They were unable to stop the Russian navy passing through Turkish-occupied waters, losing the Crimea Peninsula in the Black Sea to Russia in 1783. During the 1800s, the Ottomans lost most of their territories. Greeks and Ottoman Turks were certainly not on good terms, and in fact Greek nationalists rebelled against the Ottomans. Great Britain, France, and Russia sided with the Greeks, and the Treaty of Adrianople, which is currently known as Edirne, ended the fighting in 1878, acknowledging the independence of the Danube. After losing the Balkan territories, the Ottoman Empire continued to decline. They lost Algeria to France in 1830, and France seized Tunisia in 1881. Britain did the same with Cyprus in 1878, and Egypt in 1882. After this, the Ottomans ardently tried to reorganize their military. Sultan Abdulhamid II came to the throne, ruling as a dictator. His policies were violent and used excessive fear tactics. Religious persecution spread throughout the country. During the late 1800s, a small group of Turkish students and military officers rebelled, opposing Hamid's policies. Although the Sultan staged a counter-revolution, the Young Turks succeeded in removing him, and for a while his brother Muhammad V was made the new ruler in 1909. Unfortunately, many minorities suffered greatly at the hands of their cruel masters. Many beheadings of infidels became the norm. They forced the families and even the children of those not belonging to their religious ideals into submission and undignified situations at every level. They were completely against every new way of thinking and all conceivable advancements one could imagine. Progressive thinking was not allowed, and women were not valued. In fact, many newborn female babies were buried alive. Christian minorities such as the Armenians demanded freedom from Ottoman rule. The empire continued to decline. Soon after the revolution in 1908, Bulgaria became independent, Austria claimed Bosnia, and in 1912 Italy took Libya. In 1913 Greece took Cyprus, and by 1914 the empire lost all its European territories except Thrace. It was about this time in history my father was born, in 1911, and mother in 1914. They certainly had some interesting stories to tell. The Ottoman Empire entered World War I during that year. They sided with Germany and Austria-Hungary in an attempt to regain all their lost territory. Although their forces appeared to succeed, the British, French, and other Allied forces fought to gain control of the Straits in order to assist Russia. Despite all that, Turkey was able to drive back the invaders, yet they ended up with a crushing defeat, and the Allies won the war in 1918, Allied troops occupying Istanbul and the Straits. During May 1919, Greek troops landed in the Turkish port of Izmir to provide protection for the Allied forces. The Greeks then began to advance further into the country, and the Turkish populace became more resentful against the inability of their Ottoman rule to defend their country. Alas, there were many more reasons for Turks to protest against Ottoman rule. Education, particularly the education of girls, was not emphasized. Yet one discovers that in ancient days, science and education was regarded as important by those adhering to the religious identity of the Ottomans. Under strict Islamic rule, Ottoman sultans progressively did not become brilliant leaders, disallowing creative thinking. During those pre-revolutionary days, art of any kind was deemed to be against principles laid down by Allah, and anyone practicing such acts of an allegedly satanic nature was punished severely. Song and dance was not approved of, nor was painting people's portraits, for that was considered as idol worship, which their religion forbade. Only religious art of Quran-based calligraphy and ornamentation was permitted, although some of the Ottoman conquerors' images had previously been painted by European artists of renown. When the very first light bulb was introduced and installed in the Sultan's palace, it had to be removed immediately, for it apparently glowed with the mocking grin of the devil. Many Judaic laws were Islamized and practiced under the guise of their religious identity, with additional rules including dictation on men and women's dress codes and what they ate and drank. Some of those rules in regard to ancient hygiene and behavioral patterns were appropriate. For example, the eating of pork after unhygienic storage, or consuming wine after the practice of crushing grapes under people's dirty feet. However, those rules and regulations were over the border, as with many other practices, and were punishable by death. It was then that Mustafa Kemal, a Turkish military hero born in Thessalonica, organized a nationalist movement. Under his leadership, a nationalist congress met in Sivas in September to form a government. In April 1920, the congress organized the Turkish Grand National Assembly in Ankara. They elected Kemal as the assembly president, but the Sultan's government signed the Treaty of Sivas with the Allies in August 1920. Under that treaty, Turkey was reduced to just the city of Istanbul, and the Sultan's popularity declined. In September 1922, nationalist forces drove the Greek troops out. The Grand National Assembly abolished the office of Sultan, and the Allies agreed to draw up another peace treaty with the nationalists. The Treaty of Lausanne was signed in 1923 and set the borders of the country as they are today. My parents have certainly experienced interesting and exciting times, but they were not the good old days. They were troubling times. In that confusion they had to hide themselves when in Turkey and blend in with the locals of that country. No matter what innovations in thought and political expressions were present at the time, the old mentality amongst the Turks was still alive. Have they changed today? One would ideally wish they have, but unfortunately the ingrained mentality still remains. Religious fanaticism rules supreme. The Grand National Assembly proclaimed Turkey a republic on October 29, 1923, and elected Kemal as their president. During the 1920s and 1930s, they underwent major social changes, doing away with certain Islamic traditions, such as the Arabic alphabet, the Islamic legal system, Muslim schools or madrasas, and the wearing of Islamic clothing by both men and women. They abolished the civil and religious office of the caliph and outlawed polygamy, the having more than one wife and therefore harems. Women were given the right to hold positions and vote. None of these changes were previously unavailable under strict Islamic law. Now citizens had right to practice any belief system, although the country is known to be officially Islamic. However, the radicalism of old remains even today, although many Turks prefer to deny it. There are many Armenians amongst other minority groups whose rights are restricted, although as a survival strategy they had to change their identities and names, thereby achieving acceptance. When and if their parental backgrounds are questioned, the consequences can be catastrophic. Strangely, if anyone is unfortunate enough to have to declare the unacceptable or infidel names of his or her parents, that person is forced to feel embarrassed for having a so-called criminal background. Worse still, one may be completely shunned or constantly under surveillance. However, history shows that some Turks preferred the traditional system and opposed Mustafa Kemal, known as Atatürk, the father of Turks. He was the first Turkish president serving until his death in 1938. İsmet İnönü became the next president, and under him Turkey evaded entering the Second World War. This is also when they joined the United Nations. After the war, Russia demanded the right to build military bases in the Straits and have control of the country's eastern territories. Turkey requested the Western powers' assistance. I was only 4 years old when U.S. President Truman announced the Truman Doctrine in 1947. This way, the United States was enabled to provide assistance to any country threatened by outside forces, and in return, the United States would build military bases on Turkish soil. Atatürk founded the Republican People's Party, which governed Turkey since its establishment until 1950, when the Democrat Party won the majority of the Grand National Assembly. Celal Bayar became president and Adnan Menderes was appointed prime minister. By the late 1950s, national debt was on the increase, and there were restrictions on freedom of speech. But one wonders if the system is any different today. The Democrat Party lost its popularity during 1960s, and military forces considered the party becoming more and more distant from Atatürk's ideals. The General Cemal Gürsel took control of the country, and the military placed a number of former leaders on trial. Prime Minister Menderes was publicly hanged and President Bayar sentenced to life, but was later released. Although we have been told so many things in this regard, it all appeared biased. There were others who denied all the information provided and claimed that Mr. Menderes was selling Turkey to Americans, and this was allegedly the real reason for what happened to him. Busloads of school children were encouraged to pay their respect by visiting the hanging traitor and read the judgment paper attached to his chest. Unfortunately, it was an ugly experience to witness. I remember the empty streets normally bustling with activity when I took a stroll observing soldiers with their guns and army tanks rolling along the streets. This was during one of the school holidays. It was eerie and frightening, just like in the movies, except it was happening in real life. The feeling was that someone could be shot, and it could be me. One soldier approached me and said, "But you are going home, aren't you?" I answered him with a definite yes, and continued walking. I wanted to see one of my school friends. I just cannot forget that time of unrest when in Ankara